Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today is another swing in temperatures. It's going to be 88 degrees. Yesterday I think it was in the 60s, and then over the weekend we're going to hit into the 30s again. This is just the temperamental Utah weather, and I know that other areas in the United States do this too. But I thought this would be a good time to discuss how to water for the drought restrictions that we're going to be having. I have this gut feeling we're going to be having a really hot summer. It's going to be dry, at least here in Utah. Other places may have more moisture, and I'm really excited for you guys. But for the areas that are not going to have the precipitation that you need, let's discuss how to water your landscapes for the health of the plants and also to save water. So let's look at my grass first. Now here's the lawn in my backyard. This is actually the only lawn left over that I have. I really don't have a use for grass. My dogs are gone, my kids have moved out. And so I've removed most of my grass. And as you can see, it's really healthy and green, and you would think that I have been watering this a ton. Yesterday was, I think, the third time that I've watered this season. The sprinkler heads that I have here are rotors. There's one on each corner, and they're not the most efficient, and that's going to be fixed in a little while. Probably not this year, but I think next year. Now the way the irrigation is set up in this yard is not the most efficient. So that's number one that you can do to save water, is check your irrigation and see how efficient it is. You need head-to-head coverage. That means each sprinkler head needs to reach all the way over to touch the head of the other sprinkler. And then you need at least 3 sprinklers covering one area. If they're all doing head-to-head coverage and there's 3 of them, then you can get good coverage. And you don't need to overwater to be able to keep your lawn green. So get your irrigation checked and see if you can get it adjusted. Now my irrigation, the person who set it up so that we have one irrigation head over there, one over here, then it swings all the way over here. We've got another head that's in the weed mat over there. Let's go up here. We've got another head in the middle of the lawn, the hill up against the fence up there, and then one at the very top of the hill, and they all throw water a long distance. Now this is the next thing that you need to do to be able to conserve water. This hill is really difficult to wet down. It's west facing, it's on a hill, the water just slides off. So I have to water it. I split my irrigation cycles. I water this area and this area over here for 20 minutes. So I split it 10 minutes each time. And this hill by midsummer, you can see the dead spot at the top. By midsummer, this hill is mostly dead. But I sacrifice this hill because I don't want to overwater everything else just to keep this hill wet. Now, my ultimate goal is to remove all the grass out of here, put a chicken run up at the top, add some stairs here, because if I let this hill just go to dirt, then it's a hazard for me to try and get up. I'm an old woman and I don't want to be sliding down mud on the hill or rocks or whatever. So we're going to put stairs on this. We're going to kind of dig it out, put some stairs on it, put a chicken run at the top. And then maybe expand my garden beds over there, or just add mulch in this area. We'll see what we're going to do. So when we do that, we're going to cap off these irrigation heads, and we're going to change it to drip, because when they set up the irrigation originally, they have it watering this hill. So this is not efficient. This wastes water as it is, and hopefully by next year we're going to have that fixed. So look at the efficiencies of your water. If you have hills, either take the grass off the hills or split up your irrigation timing split it in half or even thirds, and water them for shorter amount of times but more often, so that the water has time to soak in rather than run off the hill. Once we convert this zone that has these 2 irrigation heads down here, once we convert that to drip, those 2 irrigation heads down here are no longer going to work. So we're going to trench from this. There's another zone where there's an irrigation head here. There's one at the corner of that little tiny concrete pad. And then there's another one up against the bushes in here. So there's 3 heads that cover this area. So we're going to remove the grass out of this area. Let me turn you around. remove the grass out of this area because we're no longer going to have spray heads covering it. And we're going to turn this into a seating pad, seating area. Just put kind of a brick pad down or something like that. But that will also conserve water. Then we're going to attach that sprinkler head to these sprinkler heads, or actually probably just trench and add 2 more. Move this one forward up to this corner, possibly add one in the middle, and then put in different sprinkler heads that are more efficient. So there's another way to save water, is make sure the heads that you have are the most efficient for your area. The next thing that I do, if you notice right through here, it looks like we're almost getting a dry patch. And we did. Last night, when I came through and looked at my yard, this whole area right here had turned gray, and when I walked on it, you could see my footprints, and you can still see them a little bit. That meant this area had dried out quite a bit, and I've not turned on my irrigation to automatic, where it just waters, every few days. What I do is I wait until I see the lawn get to that point. The lawn on the hill over here had also gotten to that point where you could see my footsteps and it turned gray, and I gave it a really deep soaking. And we're not going to water again until we see those same signs. Now the reason I'm doing this is I want to force my grass roots to penetrate deeper. I don't want them on the surface, because when they're on the surface and the soil starts to dry out when it gets hot, then you have to water more often. But if the roots are deeper, then you're going to be able to let it go a little bit longer between irrigations. Now the other thing that I have going for me in this lawn, the reason I haven't had to water that much, is you can see the amount of shade. It gets shaded in the morning, we get midday sun, really strong midday sun, and then in the evenings it's also shaded by the house. So this is on the east side of my property. So another way to conserve water on lawns is to situate them in areas where they do get a little bit of shade, and then use shade tolerant grass seed. That way you can conserve water because you're not getting as much evaporation. One other thing you want to do is when you water, you want to make sure your water penetrates as deep as possible. With turf grass, I like to try to get it down at least 8 inches. But I have to show you something interesting. This is a core remover, a soil core remover. And you can tell how deep your grass goes, or roots go. You can tell the type of soil you have, and you can tell how deep the moisture is going by taking core samples. Now this one is really interesting. This is an issue that I have on my property. When I bought the property, I found out that the previous homeowner was the one who actually built the house. Instead of bringing in topsoil, he brought in sand. Now my soil is definitely not sand. Let me show you what it looks like underneath the sand. This is what my soil looks like. It's clay. You can almost make a pot with it. And it's completely full of rocks. Huge rocks. Let me show you a pile of rocks that I pulled out. This is just out of planting holes. I collected all these rocks, just pulling them out of planting holes. They're big rocks, little rocks. We're on a hillside on what used to be an old lake, an ancient lake. And this is all the rubble that has come off this hill back here. So everywhere they put grass, they put that much sand. So we have, maybe 2-inch layer of sand. The top of that is the topsoil that's built up with my grass. So let's look at that a little bit. Now we want deep grass roots. So how deep are my roots? If you look, the roots have not penetrated into the sand that much, maybe a little bit, but they're that deep. You can see where the end of my roots are. I'd like to push them deeper, but this core went down to where we hit the clay and hit rocks, and I couldn't push it in any further. And I really doubt that the grass roots are going to go that deep. But this is how deep my grass roots are back here. Now, if you don't have a soil core remover, you can actually take a screwdriver, a long screwdriver, and push it into your soil to see how deep the water is penetrated. You can also take a shovel, maybe a narrow shovel, and dig out a little bit and see how deep your roots are. So as a short summary for lawns, check your irrigation, make sure you have the correct heads, you have the correct coverage. Make sure you're watering at the proper timing for whether you're on hills or on flat ground so you don't have runoff. And make sure that the water is penetrating deep enough that your roots are growing deep. You don't want them shallow so that they don't bake in the sun. And don't water more often than necessary. If you continuously water, you're going to keep your roots shallow. The last thing is, if you can possibly give your lawn a little bit of shade in the heat of the day, that also helps. So now let's move on to vegetable garden beds and discuss how we can drought-proof those. So let's first look at this little bed. This is one of my Vijayga beds. I'm an affiliate with Vijayga, so I'll link that down below. And let's kind of look and see what we've done here. First thing that you've noticed is I've mulched this bed. I actually took all the straw that I used to protect my more tender fruit trees over the winter, some leftover bags of leaves, threw them on my lawn, and I will post a picture up on the top of how much that was and what it looked like. And then I used my mower and bagger and mowed them all up and chopped them really fine. So I have double use out of this straw, and it's a good mulch. So I put a good thick mulch over this. And then I also have drip irrigation. Let's show you what the drip irrigation looks like in my beds that have it exposed. So this is my drip irrigation. Drip irrigation is always the most efficient way to water. I have enough lines so that it does completely cover the bed. When I water with this drip irrigation, every part of it gets watered. I water about an hour to make sure I push the roots really deep, and I water 3 times a week. So 3 times a week at an hour, and that works out really well for me. The other thing that I've done, I've done on this bed, and I'm going to be adding it to every single one of my beds, is I'm going to put a shutoff valve on every single one of my beds. So if I have beds that are either empty like these, or that have onions or garlic that don't need to be watered when they're about ready to be harvested, then I'm going to have a shutoff valve so we're not watering those beds and wasting water. So that's another way to save water. And let me show you this valve over here because I haven't quite finished installing it on this bed. So the way I've set these beds up, they are all on my irrigation system. The garden zones are on their own zone, so I can turn them on and turn them off when needed without having to water anything else. I have this line that connects. I'm going to be burying these lines eventually when I'm done with this food forest. But this line connects to my irrigation valve. It comes up under the bed and pops up right here. So what I'm going to do is cut this in half. So then I can just slide each end into the cut ends on the hose, and there I'll have my shutoff valve. So I can shut this bed off if I don't need to water it. The other thing you need to do is pay very close attention to what you fill your beds with. Now, peat moss holds water quite well, so I add peat moss. Compost gives nutrition because peat moss does not have any nutrition, so I have peat moss and compost. Now, the game changer, if you noticed in the sunlight, there's some shiny particles. These shiny particles are vermiculite. Now, vermiculite and perlite are 2 different things, and let me show you. Now, here's some vermiculite. Here's the bag of vermiculite. That's what it looks like. Vermiculite is actually an expanded rock product. So it's kind of soft and gushy. I guess that's a good word, huh? But it's kind of soft, and it soaks up water and slowly releases it. When I fill garden beds and don't add vermiculite to it, they dry out very quickly, and I end up needing to water every day. But if I add vermiculite, enough vermiculite, which I generally do 1/3 vermiculite, 1/3 compost, and 1/3 peat moss, if I do that much vermiculite, then I only need to water 3 times a week rather than every day. Now, the last thing that you can do in your garden beds is the same thing that you do with your lawn, is train the roots to go deeper. If you start off by watering every day, then the roots on your little vegetable plants are going to stay where the water is. So shallow water, like 10 minutes a day, every day, is going to push your water about that deep. But if you water it an hour, get the water that deep, and then wait until your vegetables show the slightest sign of drought stress before you water again, those roots will be pushing deeper and deeper to find water. So when the top of the bed starts to dry out, your plants aren't going to die because they've already accessed the water that's deeper in the soil. So you may need to water every day in the very beginning when the plants are brand new and shallow, but then slowly start to expand the amount of time between when you water so that you can push those roots deeper. So what you want is deep, healthy roots and deep water. So once again, to just kind of quickly recap in the garden beds, use vermiculite, use peat moss, make sure you pay attention to the soil that you put in there, that it does drain well, but that it also holds water. Next thing you need to do is make sure you use drip irrigation if at all possible. Put it on its own zone so you don't have to water other plants when you're watering your garden beds. Put a shutoff valve on. It's really easy to put a shutoff valve. I think I got those at Home Depot. On your garden beds, on each and every one of your garden beds, so you don't have to water the beds that are empty, so you're not wasting water that way. And then mulch your garden beds. So if you do all those different things, you'll be able to save water in garden beds also. Now let me take you to my front yard. Hopefully it's not too sunny, and we'll show you what I've done to save water in the front. So this is my front yard, and I've removed all the grass out of my front yard. Now you don't need to remove all the grass out of your front yard like I've done. This is just my preference. But you can reduce the amount of grass in your front yard. If you look up Localscapes, they have some excellent suggestions on how to choose where to put the grass and how much grass you should put in. But definitely grass can cool off an area, it's pleasing to look at, and it's easy to maintain. So grass can definitely be part of a drought-tolerant landscape. Just utilize the steps that I talked about at the beginning of this video. Let's go over what I've done in my front yard, and you can apply this to all of your planting beds. You know, not your garden beds, not your lawn areas. These principles can be applied to planting beds. So let's look and see what I've done to save water here. Now, as you can see, poking out of my mulch, we have drip irrigation. I've converted every part of my front yard that is planting bed, which is all of it, into drip irrigation, and that's how it's watered up here. Now there's several different ways to use drip irrigation, and for every situation there's a drip irrigation that would work best. So in my area I have thickly planted beds, so I've used inline drip emitters. As you can see right here, this hose has a hole in it. It's got a pressure regulator. I also, up there you can kind of possibly see my irrigation box, and that has a drip irrigation valve on it. So this drip system is an inline drip system. I have them spaced about every 18 inches apart, and the holes are every 18 inches apart. So this entire area is getting water. So all the trees are getting water, the shrubs and the perennials are all getting the same amount of water. Now, as for efficiency, the trees do need less water and they need deeper water than the shrubs and the perennials. So if I had less plants in here, the more efficient way to water things would be point source drip irrigation, which means you have a blank line without holes in it, and then you add drip emitters. When you do that, you can actually control the amount of water each plant gets. So for example, you could put 5 gallon per hour drip emitters on trees, which will give them more water. And you can put like either 1 gallon hour or half gallon hour emitters on your perennials. Now that will give them less water because their root systems are more shallow. Shrubs, you can probably do a 2 gallon an hour emitter. So if you have less plants, having those point source emitters is a very, very efficient way of watering. The other thing that will do is help eliminate weeds because you're only putting water where the plants need it. Now the other thing that I've done to save water up here is I have chosen my plants very, very carefully. Every single one of these plants, except for the strawberries right here, take approximately the same amount of water. These plants, if I train them correctly, mulch deep enough, and maybe not during the hottest part of the summer, but most of them could only need to be watered about once every 2 weeks. It's May right now, the end of May, and I planted all of these plants this spring, and I do have to say it has been cooler, but I've only been watering these plants every 10 days. I just wait to see where the most sensitive plants, where several of them start showing drought stress, and then I water very, very deeply. Now my goal is to push these plants by next year to once every 2 weeks. Maybe in the spring, maybe I won't need to water until it starts getting hot. But these are newer plants, their roots are shallow, so they're needing a little bit more water this year. So choose your plants carefully and water according to their needs, not according to a schedule. Other thing that helps is I've added a really thick layer of mulch. I've got about 4 inches of mulch on this property, and I'm waiting for a chip drop, and I'll put a little bit more mulch on there with wood chips. If I can keep a thick mulch on here, maybe I can even push these past 2 weeks for watering. So once again, as a recap for planting beds, mulch deeply, use drip irrigation, and use the appropriate type of drip irrigation for your planting style. Fewer plants can use the point source drip emitters. More thickly planted plants do need the inline emitters. Then choose the right type of plants for your climate. Make sure to use plants that need less water. There are absolutely gorgeous plants that you can use that will need less water. And maybe the next video or a couple of videos after that, I will do a video on the plants that I've chosen for my front yard that are drought tolerant and beautiful. I've already done one on edibles that I use as ornamental plants, but maybe I will cover some of the plants that I use that are ornamental only that are drought tolerant. So choose the proper plants and then water them only as needed. You want to do the same thing that you do with the turf. You want those roots to go really deep. Now the soil in this front yard is the exact same as the soil in the back because this used to all be lawn. We've got the topsoil layer, which is about that deep, that came from the grass decomposing. Then we've got sand that is about 2 inches deep, and then under that we've got the rocks and clay. Now when I planted these plants, the bottom part of them are in the rocks and clay. The compost holds a ton of water. So if I only watered shallowly, then the only place where the roots would be up in that compost layer, because the compost is going to hold the water until it's full. Then it'll drain into the sand after it's completely full of water. And then it'll quickly drain through the sand and get sucked down into the clay near the bottom. So I want to water deep enough that we actually get to that clay layer down at the bottom and make sure that clay layer stays wet so that the roots don't stay up in the compost layer. Because if the roots stay up in that compost layer, they're going to dry out really quickly when the sun dries out the compost. So hopefully this is helpful to you. I am really passionate about trying to be water conscious in drought-stricken areas. It's really important, but it can also be beautiful. You don't have to have just rocks when you live in areas that don't get as much precipitation as other areas. So I challenge you to go out and look at your landscape and see if there are any areas that you can switch things over to be a little more drought tolerant. And if you like my videos, if they're helpful to you, please like, please subscribe, share them with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.